May 25th, 1941. Somewhere in the icy waters of the North Atlantic, the hand of young midshipman Herbert Werner trembled. He gripped the periscope handles, but the tremor did not come from the cold or from fear of the enemy above. It came from a sound that did not belong to the depths. A sharp, metallic, artificial ping struck the steel hull of the submarine U-557, and the haunted echo traveled through every compartment, a metal ghost in the darkness. Decades later, in a personal diary that held his darkest memories, Werner would write, "The sound was unlike anything we had trained for. It rang through our boat like a church bell announcing our funeral. The message was clear and terrifying. The British had found them." For 3 long years, the German U-boat crews had reigned with near absolute confidence, believing the ocean depths were their sanctuary, their fortress of invisibility. They had learned that to submerge was to disappear. On that spring morning, that belief was shattered. Werner and the other 48 men on board learned that the ocean no longer hid them. That single sound was not just a warning. It was the first movement of a deadly technological symphony, one that would execute the systematic psychological demolition of the entire German U-boat force. The hunter had been seen, and the hunt was about to change sides forever. But what exactly was that sound? And how could a simple sound wave traveling through the darkness transform the ocean's most feared predators into cornered prey, rewriting the rules of war and sealing the fate of thousands of men in their iron coffins? The journey to that sound began 23 years earlier, in the depths of another war. In the final months of the First World War, Great Britain was suffocating, its transatlantic lifeline severed by the Kaiser's U-boats. In coastal laboratories, far from the fighting, British and French scientists raced against time, hunting for a solution. They experimented with underwater sound, trying to give eyes and ears to their warships. The result was a primitive but promising system, which was barely tested before the armistice. The seed, however, had been planted. During the uncertain peace of the 20s and 30s, that seed slowly germinated. In the laboratories of the Royal Navy, the concept was refined and christened ASDIC. Its principle was elegantly simple. A transmitter sent a high-frequency sound pulse through the water, a sonic scream into the darkness. If this pulse hit a solid object, such as the hull of a submarine, it would return as an echo. By measuring the time between the transmission and the return, a trained operator could calculate the distance. By rotating the transmitter, he could determine the direction. It was a way of seeing with sound. But this new vision was imperfect, like that of a newborn. The first ASDIC sets were crude. They could not determine a target's depth, only its distance and direction. In rough seas, the system was almost useless. Worse still, the ocean is a noisy place, teeming with life. Operators, wearing headphones, had to perform the nearly impossible task of distinguishing the solid, defined echo of a submarine amid the sounds of whales, schools of fish, and even layers of water with different temperatures that could bend and reflect the sound waves, creating acoustic ghosts. Still, the Royal Navy's faith in its invention grew immeasurably. In 1939, that faith had turned into a dangerous arrogance. The British Admiralty believed it had solved the submarine problem. Their war plans assumed that convoys protected by ASDIC-equipped ships would suffer minimal losses. The threat that had nearly brought them to their knees in the last war had been, in their minds, neutralized by technology. They were tragically mistaken. When war was declared, German U-boat commanders, men like Otto Kretschmer, Günther Prien, and Joachim Schepke, took their boats into the Atlantic and discovered that the much-vaunted British shield was full of holes. What began was what the German crews would call the first happy time. Ship after ship was sent to the bottom of the sea, while the U-boats suffered minimal losses. German confidence came not from technology, but from doctrine. Every sailor in the Kriegsmarine was taught with an almost religious certainty. A submerged U-boat, gliding silently on its electric motors, was a ghost. The ocean was not a battlefield. It was their accomplice, a cloak of impenetrable darkness that made them invisible and untouchable. In his secret diary, written during patrols, radio operator Wolfgang Hirschfeld summarized this belief. We believed the enemy relied on the same listening devices from the last war, which could only detect loud machine noises. As long as we maintained absolute silence after diving, we thought we were completely safe. On one side, a navy that trusted in a technology that promised to see in the dark. On the other, a navy that believed itself to be the darkness. Two absolute certainties on a collision course in the middle of the Atlantic. Invisibility was a weapon. But what happens when the invisible is suddenly seen? What do you feel hundreds of meters below the surface when the silence that has always been your greatest ally is broken by a sound that tells you, without a shadow of a doubt, that the enemy knows exactly where you are? Aboard the U-557, silence was the first to die. The metallic ping, once a strange and distant sound, began to repeat, faster and faster, louder and louder. It was like the heartbeat of an approaching predator. Each sonar pulse struck the hull and echoed through the boat, a constant and unnerving reminder that they were no longer alone. Herbert Werner saw the hunt die in his commander's eyes. The predator's confidence was replaced by the desperate caution of the prey. The transformation happened in seconds. The order was a sharp cry in the tension. Dive to 200 meters. For 7 hours they were hunted. The crew, trained for the attack, was now paralyzed in defense, powerless. They listened to the dragging, threatening sound of the destroyer's propellers circling above, a steel shark waiting for the moment to strike. Then, the unmistakable sound of heavy objects falling into the water. Depth charges. The agonizing mental countdown began. 7 seconds for a charge set for 100 meters, 20 seconds for 300. The wait was torture. The explosions were violent. Brutal shockwaves shook the submarine like a toy. Paint flakes fell from the ceiling like dirty snow. Light bulbs burst, plunging compartments into a flickering darkness. Men bled from their ears and noses, their internal cavities crushed by the pressure. The temperature inside that steel coffin surpassed 35 degrees Celsius. The air became an internal enemy, heavy, humid, and rancid. The smell of sweaty bodies, diesel oil, and the metallic odor of pure fear was suffocating. Carbon dioxide rose to dangerous levels, and the men gasped for an oxygen that had already been recycled by 49 pairs of lungs. In an act of desperation, the captain took the U-557 to a depth of 280 meters, far beyond what the German engineers had promised the hull could withstand. The submarine groaned and creaked, protesting against the crushing pressure. And then silence. The sound of the pings stopped. The enemy's propellers disappeared over the acoustic horizon. They had survived, exploiting the few known flaws of ASDIC, such as hiding beneath layers of water with different temperatures or using the dead zone directly below the enemy ship. What do you think is the most terrifying aspect of being hunted this way? The darkness, the helplessness, or the incessant sound that announces your possible death? Leave your answer in the comments. If you feel the tension of this story, it's because you are one of us. Only the chosen ones will click the red button to subscribe and continue this journey with us. But the U-557's survival was not a victory. It was merely a reprieve. On the other side of the ocean, an unprecedented collaboration was already underway. Scientists weren't just fixing ASDIC's flaws. They were about to transform it from a detection tool into a weapon of extermination, ensuring that next time for the next submarine, there would be no escape. In September 1940, with the Battle of Britain raging in the skies, a secret war of technology was taking place in the depths. Great Britain, fighting for its survival, made an extraordinary decision. It transferred its ASDIC technology, its most promising weapon against submarines, to the United States. It was an act of cooperation, born of desperation, handing over the blueprints, the manuals, and even actual equipment to the nation that would soon become the arsenal of democracy. American engineers took the British concept and fueled it with American industrial power. They did not just copy the ASDIC, they reinvented it, christening their version Sonar. The collaboration produced rapid and lethal advances. The manual rotation of the sensor, which required an operator to slowly turn a crank, was replaced by electric motors that could sweep 90 degrees of the ocean in seconds. This meant a submarine had much less time to escape undetected. The fragile canvas domes that protected the sensors were replaced with hydrodynamic steel domes, allowing escort ships to attack at 20 knots without the water's turbulence blinding the sonar. The hunter could now race towards its prey without losing contact. But what happens when the ingenuity of one nation joins with the industrial might of another? They developed dual-frequency systems. Low-frequency pulses traveled farther, like a shout in a valley, perfect for detecting a submarine at long range. High-frequency pulses were shorter, like a precise whisper, providing a sharp image for the final attack. Some systems automatically alternated between the two, giving operators the best of both worlds in a single sweep. The technology was not just improving, it was evolving at a speed that German doctrine could not keep up with. The most revolutionary innovation, however, was the Type 147 ASDIC, which entered service in 1943. It introduced the third dimension of death. Until then, ASDIC could tell a submarine's direction and distance, but not its depth. The hunt was a two-dimensional game on a three-dimensional board. The Type 147 changed everything. For the first time, escort ships could know exactly where a submarine was in the ocean's three-dimensional space. Diving deep was no longer an escape. It was just changing position in the enemy's crosshairs. The war was no longer just about tactics. It was about math. Herbert Werner, now first officer aboard the U-230, felt this change firsthand. He recorded the terrible new reality in his notes. In 1941, if we dived deep and kept silent, the escorts usually lost us within an hour. In 1943, they held contact for 5, 6, 7 hours. They always seemed to know our depth. The charges would explode precisely at our depth. It was as if they could see us. The ocean, once a cloak of invisibility, had become transparent. The Allies now had a three-dimensional map of the darkness, and for every point on that map that represented a submarine, they were developing weapons specifically designed to wipe it from existence. The submarine sanctuary was not just disappearing, it was becoming a death trap. The spring of 1943 began as a triumph for the German U-boat force. In March, Admiral Dunitz's wolf packs reached the peak of their effectiveness, sending 120 merchant ships to the bottom of the ocean. Britain's lifeline was breaking. For a brief and terrible moment, it seemed that the U-boats might win the war, but it was the climax before the catastrophe. The technological balance, which had been slowly tilting, shifted all at once, with crushing violence. May arrived, and with it, darkness. That month would forever be known in the history of the Kriegsmarine as Black May. 41 U-boats were destroyed in just 3 weeks. This represented a quarter of the entire German operational force in the Atlantic, annihilated in less than a month. On the 24th of May, a shocked and disbelieving Dönitz was forced to do the unthinkable. He ordered the temporary withdrawal of all his U-boats from the North Atlantic. In his war diary, he wrote, "Our losses have become unsustainable." The statistics were more than numbers. They were death sentences. At the start of the war, a U-boat sank on average 10 ships per patrol and returned safely. In May of 43, the exchange rate had catastrophically reversed. For every 12 merchant ships sunk, 1 U-boat was lost. Behind every number, there was a story of technological terror. On the 5th of May, U-463, commanded by Leo Wolfbauer, was detected by ASDIC while pursuing a convoy. For 3 hours, Wolfbauer tried every tactic in the German playbook: deep dives, course changes, increasing and decreasing speed, even releasing bubble decoys. Nothing worked. The ASDIC ping remained steady, relentless. With the batteries nearly depleted and the hull damaged by near misses, Wolfbauer made the desperate decision to surface and fight with his deck gun. The guns of the destroyer Vidette destroyed the U-boat in minutes. 46 men died. Only 3 survived. The next day, U-192, commanded by Werner Happe, was hunted for 6 hours. He took his boat to a depth of 300 meters, far beyond its design limits. The hull groaned and creaked under the pressure, and leaks sprang in dozens of places. But the sonar pings found them. The escorts above coordinated perfectly. One maintained ASDIC contact, while the others positioned themselves for the attack. When the depth charges came, they were surgically precise, exploding at exactly 300 meters. The pressure hull fractured. Seawater flooded the submarine. Only 8 men managed to escape the sinking boat. 44 died. The ocean, once a German hunting ground, had become a killing field where the U-boats were the prey. For the crews, the psychological impact was devastating. Radio messages brought news of boat after boat that failed to return. Friends and classmates disappeared beneath the waves. And always, constantly, there was the ping. The sound that was once a curiosity was now the beat of a funeral drum, the sound that told them, without words, that their invisibility was over. There was nowhere left to hide. With their evasion tactics now useless and their crews being hunted to extinction, German engineers raced desperately against time to find a countermeasure. But how can you create a defense against an enemy that can see through the ocean itself? How do you hide from a sound that finds you at any depth? While their crews were hunted in the Atlantic, German engineering waged a desperate battle in the laboratories. They tried to create countermeasures, anything that could restore invisibility to their submarines. The first attempt was the Pillenwerfer, a chemical device that released a torrent of bubbles, creating a false target for sonar. Against novice operators, it sometimes worked. But ASDIC veterans quickly learned to distinguish the chaotic, bubbling echo of a decoy from the solid, metallic return of a steel hull. Next came the Bold, a more sophisticated decoy. It was a balloon that, reacting with seawater, filled with hydrogen and produced a valid sonar echo. But it had fatal flaws. It could only be launched from a stationary submarine. It rose too slowly to be useful in an evasive maneuver, and most importantly, it did not move horizontally. Any sonar operator who maintained contact for more than a few minutes would realize their target was rising in a straight line, not behaving like a submarine. The most ambitious attempt was the development of a rubber hull coating codenamed Alberic, after the dwarf in Norse mythology who possessed a cloak of invisibility. The theory was sound. The rubber, mixed with air bubbles, would absorb sonar pulses rather than reflect them. But in practice, it was a disaster. The coating was heavy, degraded rapidly in salt water, and, crucially, could not withstand the pressure changes of deep diving, cracking, and peeling away. The most tangible hope came from a captured Dutch technology, the schnorkel. It was an extendable breathing tube that allowed a submarine to operate its diesel engines while remaining submerged at periscope depth. In theory, this eliminated the need to surface to recharge batteries, the moment of greatest vulnerability. But the promise of safety came with a hellish price for the crew. Operating the schnorkel required almost perfect depth control. If the submarine dipped a little too deep, an automatic valve would shut the tube, and the powerful diesel engines would begin to suck the air from inside the sealed compartment. The sudden drop in pressure was excruciating, causing agonizing ear pain and the risk of ruptured eardrums. The noise was deafening, a constant vibration that ran through every inch of the boat, making sleep impossible. And despite engineering efforts, exhaust fumes leaked inside, filling the already stale air with smoke that caused constant headaches and nausea. The men lived in a noisy, toxic hell. Worst of all, the promised invisibility was an illusion. Allied radar operators, whose systems had also evolved, learned to detect the small head of the schnorkel cutting through the waves, especially in calm seas. The schnorkel did not make the submarines invisible. It just made them a smaller, more miserable target. With countermeasures failing and the new technology bringing its own kind of torture, morale plummeted. Hope seemed lost. However, far from the exhausted crews and frustrated laboratories, in Germany's most secret shipyards, engineers were working on a radical project, a weapon that was not a countermeasure, but a quantum leap in the very nature of submarine warfare. A submarine designed to be faster underwater than most of the ships that hunted it on the surface. Could this be the technological miracle that could, finally, turn the tide of the war? On June 6, 1944, While the fate of the world was being decided on the beaches of Normandy, an invisible battle was taking place in the waters of the English Channel. Admiral Dönitz ordered all available U-boats to attack the Allied invasion fleet. It was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it. The channel was shallow, restricting maneuverability, and the airspace was dominated by hundreds of enemy aircraft. Worst of all, hundreds of escort ships created an impenetrable sonar wall. Of the 36 U-boats sent to the slaughter, 25 were destroyed. No major troop or warship was sunk. The once feared German U-boat force was reduced to a futile sacrifice. But hope, even in the darkest of times, is a stubborn thing. The last great gamble of German engineering was finally leaving the shipyards, the Type 21 Electroboot. This was not a conventional submarine. It was a creature from another world. Previous submarines were essentially surface ships that could temporarily submerge. The Type 21 was designed to live underwater. Its hull was streamlined like a torpedo, and its battery capacity was 3 times greater than that of its predecessors. This allowed it to reach a submerged speed of 17 knots, enough to outrun most of the escort ships that hunted it. It could fire all 6 of its torpedoes, reload, and fire again in under 20 minutes, all while remaining submerged. Had this weapon arrived in 1943, it could have rewritten the outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic. But it arrived too late, a technological miracle born in a collapsing empire. Production was rushed, plagued by quality issues and constant bombing raids. Only 2 Type 21 boats completed combat patrols before Germany's surrender. The U-2511, on its sole mission, demonstrated the terrifying potential of the new design. It penetrated the Allied defense lines, evaded numerous patrols, and even carried out a simulated attack on a British cruiser without being detected. Its commander, Adalbert Schnee, detected several targets but followed orders not to attack, as Germany was already in the process of surrendering. Schnee's final patrol report was a glimpse of a future that never was. He concluded that while the Type 21 was a revolutionary improvement, it was not the ghost that Germany needed. It was still vulnerable to sonar detection. Given enough time, the Allies would have developed tactics to hunt it. The war ended with the German U-boat force completely annihilated, its ports in ruins, and its best men at the bottom of the ocean. The physical battle was over. The sound of pings and explosions finally fell silent. But the legacy of that technological war was only just beginning to be understood. For the few survivors, like Herbert Werner and Wolfgang Hirschfeld, the war would not end with the surrender. How would they process the trauma of being hunted by an unseen enemy? And how would the world, having witnessed the power of sonar, apply this brutal lesson to shape the future of submarine warfare, ensuring that the ocean would never again offer a true sanctuary? The final numbers of the Battle of the Atlantic are cold, but they tell a story of annihilation. Of the approximately 1,160 submarines commissioned by the Kriegsmarine, 785 were lost in combat. 30,000 crewmen, out of a total of 40,000, never returned home. A mortality rate of 75%, the highest of any military service in any nation during the entire war. The vast majority of these losses occurred after May of 1943, after Allied sonar became omniscient. For the survivors, the war left invisible scars. Herbert Werner, the young officer candidate who felt the first ping aboard the U-557, survived. In one of history's greatest paradoxes, he immigrated to the United States and became an American citizen, using his combat experience to work as a consultant in sonar technology. He helped to improve the very weapon that had hunted him. His memoir, Iron Coffins, was a bestseller, but its dedication revealed the truth behind the success. To my fallen comrades who rest in iron coffins at the bottom of the sea. In its pages, he acknowledged the truth that took him years to accept. We were defeated not primarily by courage or superior numbers, but by a technology we did not understand and could not fight. Wolfgang Hirschfeld, the radio operator whose secret diary documented the journey from arrogant confidence to absolute terror, also survived. His diary, published decades later, gave a voice to the common men who lived and died in that hell. His last war entry captured the essence of defeat. We who sailed beneath the waves believed ourselves to be invisible warriors. The enemy taught us that invisibility was an illusion. Their sonar stole our sanctuary. In the end, we were simply men trapped in steel tubes waiting for the ping to find us. It always found us. The brutal lesson learned in the Atlantic did not die with them. It shaped the next war, the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union avidly studied captured German technology, especially the revolutionary Type 21. The competition between submarine stealth and sonar sensitivity became one of the central pillars of the global conflict, a billion-dollar cat-and-mouse game waged in the silent depths. The quest for acoustic invisibility, with quieter hulls and sound-absorbing coatings, continues to this day, a direct legacy of that first ping that struck the hull of the U-557. The story of sonar in the Second World War is more than a story of technology. It is a profound reminder of how innovation can overcome ideology, and how science can be more decisive than courage. For the 30,000 men who learned this lesson too late, the sound that transformed the war carried a simple final message. The ocean no longer hides you. What do you think about the impact of technology in war? Do you believe it diminishes the role of the individual soldier? Your opinion is important, and we want to hear it. Leave a comment, even if anonymously, and share your perspective. If this journey into the depths of history resonated with you, subscribe and like the video to join us on future explorations. In memory of the 30,000 men, their experience taught us that technology can transform war faster than doctrine, training, or courage can adapt.